That thing is not my problem." The words were not shouted. They were worse. They were cold, sharp, and precise, like a scalpel slicing through the hushed antiseptic air of the Mercy Hospital maternity ward. Julian Croft, his face a mask of bored disgust, gestured dismissively toward the tiny bundle in Amelia's arms. "You seriously thought this would work?" he sneered, his voice a low growl that vibrated with privileged contempt. "A waitress from the South Side. You must think I'm the dumbest son of a bitch in Chicago." He let out a short, brutal laugh that echoed in the corridor. "This is pathetic, even for you." Amelia Vance, just 27 but feeling 1,000 years old, sat frozen on the stiff hospital bed. Her arms, a cage of fierce, protective love, tightened around her newborn son. Her hands were trembling, but not from weakness. It was rage, pure and silent, a white-hot tremor that started in her soul. Her eyes, bloodshot and swollen, weren't from the pain of childbirth, but from the agony of this moment, the culmination of 9 months of fear and whispered hope, all of it now shattered on the pristine linoleum floor. She didn't grant him a single word. Her lips were a thin, bloodless line, a dam holding back a flood of grief. Her body curled inward, a mother wolf shielding her cub from the storm that wore a $1,000 coat. "I only came here to see this little circus with my own eyes," Julian continued, pacing the hallway like a predator in a cage that was far too small. "So you can never, ever try to pull this stunt again." "Julian." Amelia's voice was a raw whisper, shredded by exhaustion, and a sorrow so deep it felt like it was tearing her apart from the inside. "Please, just look at him. Really look at him." "I looked," he snapped, his gaze flicking over the baby with utter indifference. "He looks like every other screaming brat in this place, a prop in your sad little play." Amelia shifted, her movements slow and deliberate. She angled her son just slightly, turning his face toward the sliver of pale morning light filtering through the window. And that's when it happened. For a single, solitary second, Julian Croft stopped pacing. He saw them. The eyes, not blue, not brown, but an impossible, smoky quartz. His eyes, his father's eyes. A rare, haunting gray that was the unspoken signature of the Croft lineage, a genetic brand passed down through generations of ruthless Chicago industrialists. His gaze, against his will, drifted to the baby's skin. Pale cream, with a touch of olive. Too light, too damn familiar. His heart didn't just skip a beat. It seized. A violent, unwelcome hiccup of doubt in a man who had built an empire on absolute, unshakable certainty. But just as quickly, the mask slammed back into place. He blinked, a flicker of his head, a dismissal of the truth his own eyes had just shown him. "Nah," he muttered, turning away. "Coincidence. Genetics are a messy lottery. You just got lucky, that's all. Doesn't mean a damn thing." Time didn't just freeze in that half-second. It shattered. Amelia watched him. She saw the flicker of recognition, the hairline crack that spiderwebbed across the monolithic wall of his denial. A strangled sound, half sob, half gasp, escaped her throat. She bent her head, pressing a desperate kiss to her child's forehead. She held him tighter, as if the force of her embrace could shield him from the poison of his father's words. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or denied, I need you to hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Because this story is for every single person who has ever been told they don't matter. You are not alone. "You planned this whole thing," Julian snarled, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "You probably found some donor with gray eyes, thinking you could pin this on me. Must have seemed like the winning lottery ticket." His words were shards of broken glass, slicing through the air. Amelia flinched, but she didn't look up. Her world had shrunk to the tiny, 7-pound being in her arms. People were watching now. Nurses, orderlies, other families waiting for news. Their whispers grew like mold on damp walls, feeding on the drama. She's just trying to trap him. Look at him, he's a Croft. She's nobody. I bet she did it on purpose. She should be ashamed. None of them stepped in. None of them questioned the powerful, handsome man in the bespoke coat as he verbally dismantled a young black woman in a paper-thin hospital gown. You think because you served drinks in my house that gives you the right to ruin my name? Julian leaned in closer, his cologne, a scent of sandalwood and money, assaulting her senses. You're trash. I gave you a job, a chance, and this is how you repay me? You're not just a liar, you're delusional. Amelia closed her eyes, letting the tears finally come. Not the loud, theatrical sobs of movies. These were the tears of the utterly defeated. Quiet, heavy, exhausted tears that streaked down her face and soaked into the receiving blanket. She didn't fight back. What was the point? The war had already been lost 9 months ago. This was just the surrender. Her mind, seeking escape, drifted back. The winter gala at his Lake Forest estate. Marble halls gleaming under waterfalls of crystal, the clinking of glasses and the hollow sound of manufactured laughter. Julian, his face flushed with bourbon, summoning her to his private study. He'd spilled something on his tie. Amelia, he'd slurred, leaning against the massive oak door, his usual armor of arrogance softened by alcohol. You're different. Not like the others. You just listen. She had stood there, frozen in her server's uniform, a cleaning rag clutched in her hand. He had stepped closer, the scent of expensive liquor and profound loneliness clinging to him. It's so damn empty, he had murmured, his voice thick with a grief she didn't understand. They all clap for the brand, not the man. She remembered the shocking gentleness of his touch as his fingers brushed her cheek. The false promises whispered in the shadows of a room filled with priceless art. I wouldn't hurt you, he had said. You're safe here. That same night, he had left her in the cold silence of a guest room she had cleaned 100 times. No word. No text. The next day, she folded his laundry as if nothing had happened. Weeks later, when the 2 pink lines appeared on a pharmacy test, she had gathered every scrap of her courage to tell him. She remembered standing on the long, gravel driveway of his estate, the positive test in her trembling hand. He had barely looked at it. You're joking, he'd said, a smirk playing on his lips. I haven't been with anyone else, Julian. He had rolled his eyes and pulled out a checkbook. He didn't even ask what she wanted. He just decided her price. Get rid of it, he'd said, his voice flat and detached, as if discussing a stain on the carpet. He scribbled a number, $50,000, and tore out the check. And don't come back. A check and a slammed door. Now here they were, 9 months later, the script unchanged. Go ahead, he growled in the hospital corridor, yanking off his leather gloves. Call the press. Call a lawyer. You'll get nothing. This, he gestured venomously toward the baby, isn't mine. You saw his eyes, Julian, Amelia said, her voice finding a sliver of strength. The same smoky quartz as yours. You can lie to the world, but you can't lie to yourself. He scoffed, a sound of pure derision, and turned away. I see what I want to see, and I see a desperate woman trying to scam her way into the Croft family trust. Then leave, Amelia said quietly. Her voice didn't break. It didn't rise. It simply cut through the noise. If you have no soul, then go. I won't beg you for one. Julian paused at the door. For a split second, he looked back. At her, at the baby. He saw those impossible gray eyes again in his mind, a color that shouldn't exist twice by chance. But the ghost of his own father's voice was louder. A Croft never shows weakness. He stepped out, and the door swung shut behind him. The moment it clicked, Amelia let out a sob she'd been holding back for hours, for months, for a lifetime. She buried her face in her son's tiny body, rocking back and forth, the motion a useless balm on an open wound. The baby, whom she had named Leo, stirred and then settled against her. Through her tears, she whispered a vow into his soft hair. "You are not a mistake. You are my reason." Outside, under the hospital's sterile awning, the first snowflakes of a bitter Chicago winter began to fall. Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out that same crumpled check, creased from months of denial. He stared at it. Then, with a sigh of disgust, he ripped it in half, letting the pieces flutter to the wet sidewalk like dead leaves. But inside him, in the cold, empty fortress of his heart, the storm had only just begun. 2 years earlier, the Croft estate was a silent kingdom of glass and stone, secluded on 6 acres of manicured perfection in the wealthy Chicago suburb of Lake Forest. The mansion was less a home and more a museum to its own emptiness. Everything sparkled, but everything echoed. Amelia Vance had worked there for 3 months, a ghost in a crisp uniform. She was quiet, efficient, invisible, exactly what the job demanded. Her mornings began before the sun, polishing floors that were never scuffed, wiping down surfaces that were never touched, brewing coffee for a man who rarely acknowledged her existence. Julian Croft didn't speak in sentences, only in commands. "Polish the silver. No fingerprints on the glass. The guest wing must be ready by 5. Amelia had learned his rhythms, the precise way he liked his ties arranged by color, the way he preferred his strawberries sliced. She also knew he never, ever smiled. On the outside, Julian was the American dream personified, the billionaire CEO of a logistics empire that had revolutionized global shipping, a titan of industry featured on magazine covers. But behind the scenes, he was a machine forged in the fires of his father's brutal expectations. Cold, sharp, and dangerously bored. The winter gala changed everything. It was mid-December, and the estate was flooded with Chicago's elite. Politicians, socialites, tech barons. The air buzzed with privilege and champagne. Amelia moved through the event like a shadow, her tray of drinks the only part of her that was visible. Later that night, long after the last Bentley had crunched down the gravel driveway, Julian called her into his private study. "Amelia," he slurred from a vast leather armchair, a half-empty glass of bourbon in his hand. "Come in." She hesitated at the threshold. "Do you need something cleaned, sir?" He waved her question away dismissively. "Sit." Her hands tightened on the empty tray she was still holding. "Sir, I said sit." The study smelled of old leather, cigar smoke, and regret. A vintage record player hummed a low, melancholy jazz tune in the corner. Outside, the snow was falling in thick, silent flakes. Julian took a long sip from his glass, his gaze fixing on her with an intensity she had never seen before. It wasn't cold or commanding. It was hollow. "Do you know what it's like?" he said, his voice thick. "To have everything and still feel like you're suffocating in an empty room?" Amelia didn't respond. He let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you don't. You probably still believe in things. Purpose, people, that's cute." She began to rise, but he reached out and grasped her wrist. The touch wasn't violent, just firm enough to stop her. "You listen," he said, his voice dropping to a murmur. "You're different. You don't fawn. You don't want anything from me. You just exist. It's quiet. I like it. I think I should go, Amelia whispered. Why? He asked, his eyes searching hers. Afraid I'll hurt you? No, she breathed, the words coming out before she could stop them. I'm afraid you won't remember. That line hung in the air between them, charged and dangerous. Julian leaned in, his breath a mixture of bourbon and grief. I don't forget things that matter, he murmured, and then he kissed her. It was clumsy, searching and desperate. And Amelia, caught in a dizzying storm of fear, confusion, and a loneliness that mirrored his own, didn't pull away. Later, lying alone in a guest room she had cleaned 100 times, Amelia stared at the ornate ceiling, her heart hammering against her ribs. He didn't speak to her the next morning, or the day after. Weeks passed, and the silence solidified. Nothing changed, until the 2 pink lines on a plastic stick changed everything. When she finally found the courage to tell him, she waited until the end of a long day, finding him alone on the back terrace overlooking the vast, empty gardens. He was scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by the cold blue light. I'm pregnant, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He paused for a fraction of a second before resuming his scrolling. You're joking. I'm not. He laughed under his breath, a sound that dripped with condescension, the kind of laugh that says, You are beneath me. Come on, Amelia, you really expect me to believe that? I haven't been with anyone else, she said. Her voice trembled, but her spine was a rod of steel. He finally stood, towering over her, his jaw tight with irritation. You think I'm going to fall for this? You think I'll just nod my head and hand over a trust fund? I know your type. My type? Desperate, he sneered. Calculating. You saw an opportunity and you took it. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. I trusted you, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. He pulled a business card from his wallet and tossed it at her feet. It landed face down on the cold stone. My lawyer's name is Sterling. You want money? You talk to him. But don't you ever come back here. You're dismissed, Amelia. She left that night with nothing. No severance, no letter of recommendation. Just the memory of a man who had called her different and then treated her like she was nothing at all. Back in the present, Amelia sat alone in the stark hospital room. Her son, Leo, slept peacefully in the bassinet beside her. The room smelled of antiseptic and baby powder, a strange combination of clinical sterility and new life. Outside, the snow fell, blanketing the harsh lines of the city in a soft, temporary peace. Her body ached, but her heart ached more. She touched Leo's cheek, marveling at the impossible softness of his skin. She remembered every cruel word Julian had hurled at her just hours before. But she also remembered that single, shattering half-second when he saw Leo's eyes. His eyes. There was a fracture in his certainty. She saw it, she felt it. He didn't believe her, no. But for the first time, he wasn't entirely sure of his own lie. And doubt, she knew, could be a powerful seed. Amelia leaned forward, pressing a kiss to her son's head. You are not a tool, she whispered. You are not a weapon. You are not a lie. You are my truth, wrapped in soft skin and tiny fists. You are the light, even if he refuses to see it. Ha! She turned toward the window, watching the silent descent of the snow. Somewhere across the city, far from this room, Julian Croft sat alone in the back of his chauffeured Maybach, staring at his own reflection in the tinted glass. He couldn't stop thinking about those eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt something unfamiliar stirring in the frozen landscape of his chest. It wasn't regret, not yet. It was doubt. And it didn't roar, It didn't scream, it simply whispered. The storm outside had subsided, but inside Amelia's small apartment on the south side of Chicago, winter pressed in through thin walls and rattling window frames. Leo lay bundled in second-hand blankets, his tiny chest rising and falling with the fragile rhythm of a new life. Amelia sat at her small kitchen table, a chipped mug of lukewarm tea in her hands, her gaze fixed on the folded piece of paper before her. The check. $50,000. It had been crisp and insulting when Julian's lawyer had first slid it across a polished mahogany desk. Now, it was creased and soft from months of being shoved in a drawer, pulled out, stared at, and cursed. She had never cashed it. To do so would have been an admission, an agreement with Julian that her son was nothing more than an inconvenience to be erased. She picked it up now, the paper feeling flimsy and powerless between her fingers. In the dim light of the single overhead bulb, her reflection was a ghostly image in the dark window pane. Dark circles etched under her eyes, hair pulled back in a weary bun, but a defiant strength in her jaw she barely recognized as her own. Her neighbor, Esther May, a widow in her 60s with a soft, lilting voice and a wisdom as sharp as a razor's edge, knocked once before letting herself in. She often checked on Amelia, a silent guardian angel since Leo's birth. She carried a steaming pot of chicken noodle soup, the aroma a gentle promise of comfort. "You need to eat, child," Esther May said, her eyes taking in Amelia's exhausted face. She set the pot on the stove. "What's weighing on you now?" Amelia held up the check. "He gave me this before Leo was born. Told me to get rid of him. Told me I was a liar." Esther May's lips tightened into a firm line. "Men like that think money is a bandage big enough to cover a poisoned soul. It ain't." "He came to the hospital," Amelia whispered, her voice cracking. "He looked right at Leo and still said he wasn't his, but—" "For just a second, Esther." He stopped. "He saw something. I know he did." Esther May ladled the rich, golden soup into a bowl and set it in front of her. "You don't need his belief to raise that boy, Amelia. You need your own." Amelia swallowed the lump in her throat. She reached down and gently touched Leo's tiny hand where it peeked out from his blankets. "I know, but how do I explain to my son, when he's older, why his own father denied him?" "You explain it by showing him you never did," Esther May said softly, her hand coming to rest on Amelia's shoulder. "You chose him. You fought for him. In the end, that's the only story that matters." The words were a balm, but the ache in her chest remained. She couldn't shake the image of Julian's face in the hospital, the flicker of recognition so quickly buried under a landslide of arrogance. That flicker haunted her. Miles away, in a penthouse office that scraped the Chicago sky, Julian Croft stared out at the glittering, indifferent cityscape. A new checkbook lay open on his vast, empty desk. He had ripped up the first check outside the hospital in a fit of rage, but now his lawyer had convinced him to double down. $100,000. His lawyer, a sleek, cold man named Sterling, stood across from him, arms folded. "If you want this to go away, Julian, then make it go away. Money talks. She's a single mother working shifts at a diner. She won't hold out forever." Julian rubbed his temple, a headache pounding behind his eyes. "She's stubborn. She didn't take it the first time." "Then she's bluffing," Sterling replied smoothly. "If this ever got to the press, we could spin it. You've always been untouchable, but if you pay her quietly now, it dies in the shadows." For the first time, the word untouchable felt hollow. Julian had built his life on control, on bending the world and its people to his will. Yet one woman and one child had unsettled him in a way no corporate rival ever could. He saw those quartz-gray eyes again, that pale, familiar skin. He heard his father's voice, a ghost from his childhood, echoing in his head. Never let them see you weak, boy. Weakness is a disease. You cut it out before it spreads. But was this doubt a weakness? Or was it the first glimmer of a truth he had tried to bury? He shoved the thought away. Draft the paperwork, he muttered to Sterling. The next morning, Amelia found an envelope slid under her apartment door. Inside was another check, this one for double the first amount, and a typed, soulless letter. Take this money and move on. Do not contact Mr. Croft again. This is the final offer. Amelia crumpled the letter in her fist, her knuckles white. Tears of fury burned her eyes. She wasn't surprised by his arrogance, but the insult cut deeper this time. He thought her silence had a price tag. He thought her son could be erased like a rounding error on a balance sheet. She marched downstairs with the envelope, didn't even pause, and tossed it straight into the grimy trash bin on the corner. Then she picked up Leo, holding him tight, and whispered fiercely into his ear, "You will not be his secret." Later that day, Amelia was back at her part-time job at a corner diner. The neon sign buzzed erratically. The air smelled of stale coffee and grease, and her feet ached, but she held her head high. Leo was safe at Mrs. Hernandez's apartment next door, sleeping in a borrowed crib. As she wiped down a sticky counter, two men in a booth were talking too loudly. "Did you hear about that billionaire Croft? Some former maid is claiming he's the father." The other man snorted. "Figures. Women like that are always looking for a payout. She's probably lying through her teeth." Amelia's stomach twisted into a knot, but she forced her face to remain a blank mask. This was her life now. Judgment from strangers who knew nothing but headlines, whispers in the dark that chipped away at her dignity, piece by piece. When her shift ended, she walked home through the lightly falling snow. Her coat was too thin for the biting Chicago wind, but she pulled it tighter and kept moving. Above her, Christmas lights twinkled weakly from apartment windows. The world felt both cruel and beautiful all at once. Back in his office, Julian poured himself another whiskey. He told himself he had done the right thing, that he had protected his empire. He told himself she was a manipulative liar, a threat. Yet when he closed his eyes, it wasn't her face he saw. It was Leo's. Not an abstract idea of a baby, but a specific face, with his own features staring back at him in miniature. He drained the glass in one go, but the image refused to fade. In her apartment, Amelia sat by Leo's crib, humming a lullaby her mother used to sing to her, back when life was simpler, when dignity wasn't a daily battle. Leo stirred, and for a brief second, opened his eyes. Smoky quartz. Amelia smiled through her unshed tears. "He can deny you all he wants, little one," she whispered. "But the truth has a way of shining through, even in the darkest rooms." The night settled heavy around them. Two souls, separated by a city and a chasm of wealth, one clinging to denial, the other clinging to hope, both bound by a child who carried more than just their blood. He carried the weight of a justice yet to come. And somewhere deep inside, in the growing cracks of his certainty, Julian Croft carried something he could no longer shake. The gnawing, terrifying suspicion that the life he had tried to erase was the very one that might expose him for who he truly was. Mia is fighting this battle against a powerful man, all alone, but she doesn't have to be. Show her she has a global community of support right here by commenting where you're watching from. Let's show her that kindness and truth have no borders. The first Sunday of February dawned cold and gray over Chicago's South Side. The streets were damp from melted sleet, littered with newspapers that clung to the curbs like discarded confessions. Amelia pushed Leo's stroller slowly toward the small brick church on the corner. She hadn't set foot inside a church in years, not since her mother passed, but something inside her ached for a sanctuary, for words stronger than the whispers of her neighbors or the cruel speculation of strangers at the diner. The sanctuary was warm, the air filled with the scent of old wood and candle wax. The congregation was small but vibrant, elderly women in brightly colored hats, children fidgeting in the pews, men with work-worn hands nodding to the rhythm of the gospel choir. Amelia slid quietly into the back row, rocking Leo gently as the pastor's voice, full of fire and hope, washed over her. After the service, as people mingled, an older woman approached her. She was tall and carried herself with an unshakable dignity that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. Her name was Esther May, the same woman who had brought her soup. "You're Amelia," she said, her voice both a question and a statement of fact. Amelia blinked, startled. "Do I know you?" "Not yet, child," Esther May replied, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "But I know of you. I run the community kitchen down the block. I've heard your story. The truth has a way of traveling, even when folks try to twist it." Amelia tensed, instinctively bracing for judgment, but Esther May's eyes softened as she looked down at Leo, who was cooing softly in his stroller. "He's got eyes like a storm rolling in off the lake," Esther May murmured. "I've seen that color before. On his grandfather, Old Man Croft, back when he was nothing but a ruthless wolf in a cheap suit. That color is rare, strong, can't be hidden." Amelia swallowed hard, the validation so unexpected it felt like a physical blow. She wanted to believe those words, to let them sink into the parched soil of her soul. But she had learned to expect only doubt. "People say I'm lying," she whispered, the words tasting bitter. "They say I'm just trying to trap him." Esther May's gaze sharpened, not with anger at Amelia, but at the world. "Let them say what they will. The truth don't need their permission to exist. The truth stands on its own 2 feet, even when men with money and power try to bury it under a mountain of lies." Amelia lowered her head. "I don't know how to keep standing, Esther. I'm so tired." Esther May reached out, placing a weathered, warm hand over Amelia's. "You stand because that boy needs you to. You stand because every woman who came before you, who was told she was nothing, refused to stay down on the ground. Don't you see, child? You're not just fighting for him, you're fighting for your own soul." The words settled deep in Amelia's chest, heavy and yet strangely liberating. For the first time in months, she felt seen, not as a scandal, not as a liar, but as a mother, doing the impossible in a world designed to break her. That evening, Amelia visited the community kitchen Esther May ran. The shelves were lined with canned goods, the walls with faded photographs of families who had been helped over the years. Esther May introduced her to other mothers, to volunteers, to neighbors who smiled at Leo without a hint of judgment. For a few precious hours, the crushing weight on Amelia's shoulders eased. "You are not alone here," Esther May said firmly, as if she could read the doubt still clouding Amelia's mind. "Don't you ever forget that." Meanwhile, across town, Julian Croft's life spun in a different orbit. He sat in a private dining room at a sleek downtown steakhouse, surrounded by investors and city officials. His laughter was rehearsed, his wine glass perpetually half full. On the surface, he was the untouchable king of his domain. But beneath the table, his foot tapped a restless, frantic rhythm against the floor. He heard the echo of what Amelia had whispered in the hospital. "He has your eyes." He replayed the image of the baby in his mind for the 1,000th time. Those smoky quartz eyes had followed him into every boardroom, every elevator, every empty, echoing night in his penthouse since that day. At one point, an investor leaned across the table. Julian, you seem distracted. Everything all right? Everything's perfect, Julian lied, flashing the perfected, polished smile that hid the cracks in his foundation like a fresh coat of paint over rotting wood. But when he returned to the sterile silence of his penthouse, the mask slipped. He poured a whiskey and sat alone, staring at the glittering skyline. The city lights sparkled like a carpet of diamonds, yet none of them could penetrate the growing shadow in his chest. He had built his entire empire on the bedrock of certainty. Now, for the first time, he wasn't certain of anything at all. Back on the south side, Amelia wrote in the journal she kept for Leo after he'd fallen asleep. She wrote about Esther May's words, about the community that was beginning to feel like a shield, about the fire that was slowly starting to burn again inside her. "You are not a mistake," she wrote to her son. "You are not a source of shame. You are my truth. And one day, your father will have to see it too, whether he wants to or not." Days turned into weeks. Amelia worked double shifts at the diner, her body aching but her spirit steadier. Esther May checked in often, bringing meals, offering to watch Leo, reminding her that dignity was not something a billionaire could buy or sell. One evening, as Amelia walked home, a group of teenagers on the corner sneered. "There's that liar," one of them muttered. "Baby mama of the rich guy," another one laughed. "Bet she's just after his wallet." Amelia's steps faltered for a second, but she didn't stop. She just pulled her coat tighter, lifted her head higher, and kept walking. Esther May's words were a mantra in her mind. The truth don't need their permission. At home, she held Leo close, pressing her cheek against his soft hair. "One day," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you'll know how hard I fought to protect your light. You'll know the truth, no matter what anyone in this world says." And though her body trembled with weariness, her heart beat with a steady, newfound resolve. Across the river, Julian stood in front of his bathroom mirror. He stared at his own eyes, smoky quartz, unyielding. Then, like a ghost, Leo's face flashed in his mind, carrying the exact same gaze. He poured another drink, but this time, it did nothing to wash the vision away. And as the city settled into the deep quiet of the night, two lives moved on parallel tracks, one clinging to power, the other clinging to hope, both irrevocably bound by a child whose existence would soon force their worlds to collide again, with the force of a tidal wave. The March wind cut sharp across the south side, carrying the metallic scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Inside her small apartment, Amelia sat in the rocking chair that Mrs. Hernandez had insisted she take, a relic from a thrift store that had become her sanctuary. Leo lay nestled against her chest, warm and solid, his soft breath a steady rhythm that made the chaotic world feel bearable. Amelia hummed a tune her mother used to sing, her voice cracking with exhaustion. She closed her eyes, and the melody transported her back to the delivery room, to the moment after the chaos when the nurses had stepped aside, and she had heard only his cry, sharp and strong, breaking the air like lightning through storm clouds. She remembered the doctor placing him in her arms. He was so tiny, impossibly fragile, yet in that instant she had felt an anchor drop deep inside her soul. This bond, nothing and no one could ever sever. She had whispered into his ear, "You are not a mistake. You are my miracle." Her tears had fallen onto his cheeks, but he hadn't cried. He had simply stared up at her, his quartz-gray eyes wide and ancient, already carrying more truth than any man dared to admit. Now, weeks later, she studied those same eyes as they blinked open, catching the faint glow of the lamp. She thought of Julian, of the way he had looked at Leo and faltered, his denial surging back like a practiced reflex. That flicker of doubt in him had been real. She clung to it, even as she hated herself for needing any piece of him at all. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Amelia rose carefully, laying Leo in his crib before opening it. Esther May stood there, a basket overflowing with supplies. "Thought you might need a restock," Esther May said, stepping inside. "Diapers, formula, a few cans of soup. Donations from the kitchen." Amelia blinked back tears. "Esther, you've already done so much." "And I'll keep doing it," she replied firmly. "Community isn't just a word we say on Sundays, child. It's a verb. It's something we do." Amelia nodded, wanting to believe it, to accept the kindness without the familiar sting of guilt. As Esther May held Leo, cooing at him, Amelia confessed in a near whisper, "Sometimes I still hear his words in my head. The way he called me a liar. The way everyone whispers when I walk by." Esther May looked up, her gaze as sharp and steady as a ship's compass. "Let them whisper," she said. "Their words don't raise this boy. You do. Their words don't decide his future. You will." Amelia felt her throat tighten. She wished her mother were alive to say those things, to remind her that she was more than the sum of the insults and shame cast upon her by a rich man who had used her and then walked away. But maybe, just maybe, Esther May was filling that empty space now. That night, after Esther May had left, Amelia sat with her journal. The pages were filling up with letters to Leo, each one a piece of her heart rendered in ink. Tonight her pen moved with a slow, heavy deliberation. "You were born in silence, but the truth was screaming inside me. Your father looked at you and chose denial. But one day, he will not be able to deny what God has written in your eyes. You are my strength when I feel I have none. You are the proof that even in the wreckage of betrayal, life can bloom." She closed the journal and kissed her sleeping son's forehead. "One day," she whispered, "he'll see you the way I do, even if it breaks him." Across the river, Julian sat in his penthouse, alone with a glass of whiskey. The city lights blinked below like 1,000 accusing eyes. His lawyer's words echoed in his ears. "Discredit her. End this now before it spreads." But another voice rose, softer yet more insistent. The voice of doubt. The image of the baby was a ghost that haunted the sterile perfection of his home. Those quartz-gray eyes cut through the armor of arrogance he wore like a second skin. He slammed the glass down on the marble countertop, shattering it. Whiskey spread like a dark stain. For a long time, he just stared at the mess, his breathing harsh and ragged. Then, he whispered into the empty, cavernous room, "Why can't I stop seeing him?" He thought of his own father, a stern, unforgiving man who had never allowed a moment of weakness. "You will never be allowed to be ordinary, Julian," he had once told him after a costly business mistake. "Don't you ever forget it." That single command had forged Julian into the ruthless machine he was. But now he wondered if it had also hollowed him out, leaving a void where a heart should be. He rose and grabbed his coat, pacing the length of the penthouse as if walking could outrun the questions chasing him. But no matter how far he walked, from one wall of glass to the other, the smoky quartz eyes of his son followed him. Meanwhile, Amelia faced storms of her own. The gossip at the diner grew sharper. Customers whispered just within earshot. A fellow waitress muttered under her breath, "She's only sticking around until she gets his money." Even some of the neighbors in her building began to look at her differently, as if Leo's very existence was a contagious scandal. One evening, leaving work with her coat buttoned tight against the lingering cold, Amelia overheard two men laughing outside. Did you hear about Croft's maid? Claims her baby's his. A guy like that, he wouldn't touch someone like her. She's just desperate for a payday." The words struck her like physical blows, but Amelia kept walking, her grip tightening on the stroller handle as Leo slept peacefully beneath his blanket. She had learned not to fight their words with her own. Her fight was survival. Her weapon was the unshakable, unconditional love she carried for her son. Back in her apartment, she looked at Leo's tiny chest rising and falling and whispered a promise. "The world may deny you. He may deny you, but I never will." That night, as the city hummed with its endless symphony of distant sirens and muffled arguments, Amelia knew she had reached a turning point. She could no longer sit and wait, hoping Julian would change on his own. If justice was ever going to come, she would have to be the one to drag it, kicking and screaming, into the light. She kissed Leo's forehead one more time and said, "You were born in silence, my son, but I promise you, your truth will not stay silent forever." And as Julian poured himself another drink across town, staring into the city lights and fighting the storm inside his own soul, the first seeds of that truth were already beginning to take root, preparing to break through the concrete of his denial. The scandal hit the Chicago elite like a rogue wave. By midweek, Julian Croft's name was trending across every social media platform. The photograph of Leo's eyes, shared from the church community page, had gone viral, becoming a silent, undeniable emblem of a whispered truth. The media, smelling blood in the water, swarmed. Reporters camped outside his corporate headquarters, outside his penthouse, even followed him to his private gym. Headlines blared across news sites. "Billionaire denies child with former maid." Those smoky quartz eyes raise questions. The fall of an untouchable titan. Inside his penthouse, the glass walls felt like they were closing in. Travis slammed the television remote against a marble coffee table, shattering the plastic casing. The screen froze on an image of Amelia carrying Leo through the rain, her chin held high, her eyes defiant even in her exhaustion. Something in that image, her sheer, unyielding strength, pierced him deeper than any of the scathing articles. She looked unbreakable. She was no longer the quiet maid who lowered her eyes when he barked commands. His new lawyer, a man even colder and more pragmatic than Sterling, arrived with a folder thick with strategy. "We can still control this," he said briskly. "File a defamation lawsuit. Demand a court-ordered DNA test, but on our terms. We discredit her in the press, paint her as unstable. If we push hard enough, she'll fold." Julian stared at him, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "And if the test proves what I already know?" The lawyer didn't miss a beat. "Then we bury the result. With enough money and the right connections, Mr. Croft, the truth is whatever we say it is." Julian's eyes hardened. "The truth isn't something you can bend, not this time." The lawyer frowned, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. "You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. Think of your empire, your investors, your legacy." "My empire is already crumbling," Travis snapped, cutting him off. "Maybe it's time I stopped pretending I can control everything." He shoved the folder back across the desk. For a moment, the lawyer looked at him as though he were a stranger. Then he gathered his things and left, muttering, "Weakness never ends well." That night, Julian sat in his dark study, the old photograph of his stern-faced father staring down at him, demanding strength, demanding denial. For the first time in his life, Julian whispered back to the ghost, "You were wrong." In the South Side, Amelia faced her own siege. Paparazzi lurked outside the diner. Strangers shouted questions at her when she pushed Leo's stroller down the street. Some offered words of sympathy, but many more hurled cruelties. "Liar!" one man shouted from a passing car. "Gold digger!" another one spat as she hurried past. Each insult cut, But Amelia kept walking, her shoulders squared. Inside, though, fear twisted in her gut. She worried not for herself, but for Leo. What scars these years might leave on him, what shadows he might carry because of his father's cowardice. One evening, Esther May visited, her presence a steady anchor in the storm. Amelia finally admitted, "I don't know how much more of this I can take. Every day feels like a battle." Esther May touched her arm, her grip firm. "Child, battles are only fought for the things that matter most, and what matters is sleeping right there in that crib. Don't let the noise of the world make you forget the reason you're fighting." Amelia looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully, his tiny fists curled, and she nodded, tears blurring her vision. "You're right. I'll fight for him until I have nothing left to give." 2 days later, the battle shifted. A subpoena arrived at Amelia's door. Julian had filed for a court-ordered DNA test. She held the legal papers in her trembling hands, a chaotic mixture of rage and relief swirling inside her. On one hand, it was another power play, another attempt to control her and the narrative. On the other, it was a direct path to the undeniable, scientific truth. She called Esther May immediately. "He's forcing a test." "Then let him," Esther May replied, her voice calm and steady. "The truth ain't afraid of a little light, child." Amelia pressed the papers to her chest, whispering to Leo, "This is it, my love. After this, they'll all see." Across the city, Julian prepared for the same test, his mind a tempest. He already knew the answer in his heart, but fear gnawed at him. It was no longer a fear of fatherhood, but a fear of the man he had been. To admit Leo was his son meant confronting the mountain of lies he had built his life upon. It meant facing the memory of the night he used Amelia and then discarded her like she was nothing. On the day of the appointment, Amelia arrived at the clinic first, holding Leo tight. She wore her plainest coat, her hair pulled back, determined not to give the swarm of cameras waiting outside any glamour to twist or exploit. Reporters shouted questions, flashbulbs popping like fireworks, blinding her as she hurried inside. Minutes later, Julian arrived through a separate entrance, flanked by aides. He looked tired, older than his 42 years, the weight of the scandal pressing down on his broad shoulders. When he entered the waiting room, a heavy silence fell. His gaze locked with Amelia's across the room. For a long, charged moment, neither of them spoke. Leo stirred in Amelia's arms, blinking awake. His smoky quartz eyes met Julian's, and the air in the room grew thick with unspoken history. Julian's throat tightened. Every excuse, every denial, every cruel word he had ever hurled at her crumbled to dust in that single, silent instant. The nurse called them back. The test itself was quick and clinical. A simple swab inside Leo's cheek, another from Julian. But the weight of the moment felt monumental. Each sample sealed and labeled was another brick in the wall closing in around the truth. Afterward, as they stood outside the clinic under a heavy gray sky, the reporters swarmed again. "Mr. Croft, will you finally admit he's your son?" "Amelia, what are you hoping to gain from this?" Julian said nothing, but he didn't immediately walk away. He glanced at Leo one last time, his guarded expression softening for a fraction of a second before he turned and disappeared into his waiting car. That flicker of raw, unguarded humanity didn't escape the cameras. By evening, the photograph of Julian looking at his son, vulnerable for the very first time, was flooding the internet. In her apartment that night, Amelia held her son close and whispered, "It's only a matter of time now, little one. The truth is always louder than the lies." And in his penthouse, Julian poured out all of his untouched whiskey, staring out at the skyline. For the first time, he wasn't trying to drown his doubt. He was bracing himself for the tidal wave of truth he knew was finally coming. The results would arrive in a matter of days, but the verdict was already written in the smoky quartz eyes of a child who shared his blood. The morning the envelope arrived, the Chicago air was thick with the smell of rain. Amelia heard the thud of mail sliding through the slot in her door and froze. A spoonful of oatmeal for Leo paused mid-air. For weeks, her life had been a chaotic storm of reporters, whispers, and waiting. Now, the storm had delivered its verdict. She walked slowly to the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. The envelope was thick and official, bearing the clinic's seal. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Words and percentages swam on the page, but one line cut through the clinical jargon like a searchlight. Probability of paternity. 9.99%. Her breath hitched in her throat. She pressed the paper to her chest as tears of relief, of vindication, of sheer, bone-deep exhaustion finally spilled down her face. "It's over," she whispered, looking at Leo, who was happily banging his little spoon against his high chair tray. "They can't deny you anymore, my love. They can never deny you again." She lifted him out of the chair, kissing his cheek as her tears wet his soft skin. "The truth is yours now." By noon, the results had leaked. News anchors interrupted their programming. Headlines flashed across every screen, and social media erupted in a firestorm. DNA test confirms. Billionaire Julian Croft is father of Southside child. The viral photo of Leo's smoky quartz eyes ran alongside every single report. In his penthouse office, Julian was sitting in silence when his lawyer burst in, phone in hand. "It's out. It's everywhere. We need to do damage control immediately. Issue a statement, talk about settlements." Julian held up a hand, silencing him. His face was pale and drawn, but for the first time in months, his voice was steady. "Stop." His lawyer blinked. "Stop? Julian, do you have any idea what this means for your investors? For the board?" "I know exactly what it means," Julian interrupted, standing slowly. He walked to the window, staring at the rain-streaked skyline. "It means he's my son, and I can't run from that anymore." For the first time, the lawyer was utterly speechless. Julian turned, his expression heavy with a resolve the lawyer had never seen before. "Draft whatever statements you need to, but make sure they tell the truth. No more lies." Across the city, Amelia's phone buzzed incessantly. Reporters, strangers, some offering support, others spitting venom. She ignored them all, focusing only on Esther May's calm voice on the other end of the line. "You did it, child," Esther May said softly. The truth stood tall. "It's not about me," Amelia replied, her voice breaking with emotion. "It's about Leo. He'll grow up knowing he was never, ever a mistake." That evening, Amelia stood at her apartment window, holding Leo in her arms, watching the flashing lights of the news vans parked on her street. It was surreal, overwhelming, but deep in her chest there was a profound sense of peace. The crushing weight of doubt had finally lifted. Julian, meanwhile, sat alone in his penthouse, the official results spread on the table before him. He read the line over and over. Probability of paternity, 99.9 to 99%. There was no escape, no denial, no more running. Leo was his blood, his son. Memories assaulted him, the night of the gala, the profound loneliness that had driven him to seek a moment of connection in Amelia's quiet presence, the cruel words he'd hurled at her afterward, the checks he'd used like weapons to try and erase his responsibility. A hot, unfamiliar shame burned in his gut. But alongside it was something deeper. A longing he had never admitted to himself. A longing to rewrite the broken parts of his own childhood, to give his son a father different from the cold, unforgiving man who had raised him. But did he deserve that chance? Could he possibly step into Leo's life after denying him so publicly, so viciously? He picked up his phone and stared at Amelia's number. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he couldn't press it. Not yet. He wasn't ready to face the sound of her voice, to face the weight of what he had done. The next morning, Julian held a press conference. Cameras flashed like a strobe light as he stepped up to the podium, his suit immaculate but his face grave. For once, his usual ironclad confidence was gone, replaced by a heavy, somber humility. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice carrying through the silent, packed room. The DNA results have confirmed what many of you have suspected. I am the father of Leo Vance. His voice faltered for a second on the name, but he pressed on. For too long, I have denied the truth. I let arrogance and fear blind me to my responsibility. To Amelia and to my son, Leo, I owe an apology that words can never truly express. Gasps rippled through the crowd of reporters. They shouted questions, but Julian held up a hand. There will be time for questions later, but first I need to say this. Leo is my son, and no matter what it costs me, I will never deny him again. The statement was broadcast live, reaching Amelia's small apartment. As she spoon-fed Leo mashed carrots, she froze, staring at the screen as Julian's words filled her small kitchen. Her chest tightened, a war of anger and relief raging inside her. "Did you hear that, baby?" she whispered to Leo. "He finally said it. He said it out loud for the whole world to hear." Tears slipped down her cheeks. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close, but it was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement was a beginning. That night, the city buzzed with the story. Some praised Julian for finally taking responsibility. Others condemned him for his months of cruel denial. His investors panicked. But for Amelia, only one thing mattered. Leo's truth had finally been spoken aloud by the man who had tried so desperately to silence it. In his penthouse, Julian sat alone after the cameras had gone, the weight of his public confession pressing down on him. He had spoken the words, but he knew that was the easy part. The harder part lay ahead, proving to Amelia, and more importantly, to Leo, that those words actually meant something. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like the master of his destiny. He felt like a man standing at the edge of a chasm, knowing that the only way to cross it would take more than money or power. It would take humility, sacrifice, and the courage to face the immeasurable pain he had caused. As rain tapped gently against the vast windows, he whispered into the silence, "I don't know if I can ever make this right, but I have to try." And on the south side, as Amelia laid Leo down to sleep, she whispered too, "The truth is yours now, my love. No one can ever take it away. And one day, you'll know just how hard we fought for it." The storm had finally broken, but the path forward, littered with the wreckage of the past and the fragile possibilities of the future, was only just beginning. This story is about the power of truth and the strength of a mother's love. If you believe in second chances, and if you believe that every child deserves to be acknowledged, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter. The lesson of this story is both clear and timeless. Truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way to the light, and genuine love cannot be permanently denied. Wealth, power, and pride can build imposing walls, but those walls will inevitably crumble in the face of honesty and accountability. Amelia's incredible strength shows us that dignity is not measured by status or wealth, but by the quiet courage to stand firm in your truth, even when the world tries to shout you down. Julian's difficult journey proves that redemption is never instant or easy. It begins the moment a person chooses humility over ego and presence over excuses. And through Leo, the innocent child caught in the storm, we are reminded that every single life deserves recognition, protection, and unconditional love. This story teaches us that while the past cannot be erased, the future can be rewritten, moment by moment, through acts of compassion, accountability, and the quiet, everyday bravery of simply showing up. Hey,